A single name, a forbidden muse. When Jungkook paints Jimin, silence falls and secrets unravel in a haunting revelation. The brush slipped from his fingers and clattered against the marble floor, echoing louder than the collective gasp that followed. Jungkook didn't flinch. "Say it again," the curator demanded, voice sharp enough to cut through the suffocating silence. "Who is your inspiration?" The spotlight burned against his skin, hot and accusing, but Jungkook only stared at the canvas, at the unfinished portrait that seemed more alive than anyone in the room. "Jimin." The name fell like a confession. For a heartbeat no one breathed. Then the room shifted. Cameras froze mid-click, critics lowered their pens, even the distant hum of the city outside the gallery seemed to dissolve into nothingness. Because everyone knew what that name carried, not just fame, not just beauty, but something fragile, something dangerous. And something Jungkook had sworn he buried. The painting was not complete, yet it held a gravity that pulled every eye toward it. A figure stood at its center, painted in strokes both delicate and violent, as if each movement of Jungkook's hand had been a battle. The face was unmistakable, soft lips, luminous eyes, a quiet sadness stitched into every line. But the eyes, they weren't looking at the audience. They were looking at him. Jungkook's chest tightened. He remembered the first time he saw those eyes like that, not under stage lights, not framed by applause, but in the dim glow of a studio at 3 a.m. when the world was asleep and only truth dared to exist. "You paint like you're afraid," Jimin had said back then, leaning against the wall watching him. "I'm not afraid." "You are," Jimin insisted softly, "you just don't know what of yet." Jungkook had laughed it off, he always did. Fear wasn't something he allowed himself to acknowledge, not when his life had been built on discipline, perfection, control. But that night had carved something into him. Back in the gallery, whispers began to rise, fragile at first, then sharp with speculation. "Why him? Isn't that strange? Is this some kind of statement?" Jungkook exhaled slowly, grounding himself. His fingers trembled, but he curled them into fists, forcing stillness. He had prepared for this moment, for the scrutiny, for the judgment. What he hadn't prepared for was the way Jimin's absence would feel like a wound reopening. "Art," Jungkook said finally, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, "is not about what's safe." The curator narrowed his eyes, "And yet you chose something very personal." Something flickered across Jungkook's face, so quick it could have been missed, but it was. Because Jimin had always been personal. Not just a muse. A memory. A mistake. The gallery lights dimmed slightly as the presentation transitioned, but Jungkook barely noticed. His gaze remained locked on the painting, on the version of Jimin that existed only in fragments of memory and regret. He had painted him 100 times before. But never like this. Never with the truth bleeding through every stroke. A memory surfaced uninvited. Rain against the windows, the faint smell of turpentine, Jimin sitting too close, watching too intently. "Why don't you ever finish them?" Jimin had asked, gesturing at the canvases scattered around. Jungkook didn't look up, because finishing something means it's over. And you don't want it to be over. Jungkook had hesitated. That hesitation had been his answer. Back in the present, the weight of that unspoken truth pressed heavily against his ribs. He stepped closer to the painting now, ignoring the murmurs, ignoring the cameras that resumed flashing cautiously, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. "There's a part missing," someone whispered. "Yes," Jungkook said quietly, though no one had asked him directly. His hand lifted, hovering just inches from the canvas. He could feel the texture of it without touching, could sense the incompleteness like a heartbeat skipping a beat. Because the part that was missing wasn't something paint could capture. It was something he had lost. The crowd shifted again as the doors at the far end of the gallery creaked open. At first no one noticed. But Jungkook did. He felt it before he saw it, that subtle shift in the air, the quiet pull of something familiar and impossible. His breath hitched. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he turned. And there, standing in the doorway as if he had stepped out of the very painting itself, was Jimin. Not a memory. Not a ghost. Real. The room fell silent once more, but this time it wasn't shock that held them, it was something deeper, something heavier. Jungkook's heart pounded against his ribs, loud enough he was sure everyone could hear it. Jimin looked at the painting first. Then at him. There was no smile, no easy warmth like before, only a quiet, unreadable expression that made Jungkook's chest ache. "You finished it," Jimin said softly. Jungkook swallowed. "No," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't." Because standing there, under the harsh lights and the weight of everything left unsaid, Jungkook realized something he had been running from all along. The painting had never been incomplete. He had been. And for the first time, he didn't look away. The door hadn't even fully closed when the tension in the gallery snapped like a wire pulled too tight. "You shouldn't be here." Jungkook's voice cut through the silence, low and sharp, carrying a warning that made several people instinctively step back. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. There was something in it, something raw, something unfinished, that made the air feel thinner. Jimin tilted his head slightly, as if studying a stranger rather than someone he once knew too well. "And yet," Jimin replied, his tone calm but edged with something colder, "you said my name in a room full of people." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd, faster now, more aggressive. Phones were lifted again. This was no longer just an art exhibition, it was something else, something dangerously close to exposure. Jungkook let out a short, humorless breath. "That doesn't mean you get to walk back into my life like nothing happened." Jimin took a step forward. The sound of his shoes against the polished floor echoed louder than it should have, each step deliberate, each movement measured. He stopped just a few feet away from Jungkook, close enough for the tension between them to feel almost visible. "Nothing happened," Jimin repeated, softer now, but the softness only made it worse. "Is that what you've been telling yourself?" Jungkook's jaw tightened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them blurred into background noise, murmurs, camera clicks, the faint hum of electricity, but none of it mattered. Because this confrontation, had been years in the making. "You disappeared," Jungkook said finally. "No explanation, no goodbye, just gone." Jimin's expression flickered just for a second, something like guilt or maybe regret, but it vanished so quickly it could have been imagined. "I didn't disappear," Jimin said, "I left." "That's the same thing." "No," Jimin shot back, sharper now, "it's not. Disappearing is running away without a reason. I had one." "Then say it." The words came out harsher than Jungkook intended, but he didn't take them back, couldn't. "Say it now," he continued, his voice rising just enough to draw more attention. "In front of everyone, since you're so comfortable showing up uninvited." The crowd leaned in, hungry for something real, something scandalous. Jimin glanced around briefly, taking in the watching eyes, the anticipation hanging thick in the air. Then he looked back at Jungkook, and this time there was no hesitation. "You want the truth?" Jimin asked. Jungkook didn't respond. He didn't need to. Jimin exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself before stepping off a ledge. "I left," he said, "because you were turning me into something I didn't recognize anymore." The words hit harder than anything else could have. Jungkook blinked, caught off guard despite himself. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Jimin continued, his voice trembling just slightly now, "that every time you painted me, every time you looked at me like I was something fragile, something perfect, I started losing who I actually was." "That's not." "Yes, it is," Jimin cut him off. "You didn't see me, not really, you saw your version of me, your idea, your escape." Jungkook's chest tightened, anger flaring up to mask something deeper. "You think this is about control," he scoffed. "About me trying to shape you into something." "I know it is." Jungkook shook his head, packing a step back before turning again, his frustration spilling over. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said. "You think painting you was about ownership. It was the only way I knew how to understand you." Jimin's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "And did you," he asked quietly, "understand me?" The question lingered. Jungkook opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, he didn't know. And that silence said everything. Jimin let out a quiet, almost bitter laugh. "Exactly." The distance between them felt wider now, despite standing so close. "You want to know why I left?" Jimin continued, his voice steadier now, more controlled. Because I realized something that scared me more than anything else. Jungkook's gaze snapped back to him. What? Jimin hesitated. For the first time since walking in, he looked uncertain. Because I was starting to believe you, he said. Jungkook frowned. Believe me about what? Jimin's eyes flickered toward the painting, the unfinished portrait that had started all of this. That I was only worth something when I was seen through your eyes. The words landed like a blow. Jungkook felt it in his chest, sharp and immediate. That's not true, he said quickly, almost instinctively. Isn't it? Jimin challenged. Look at that painting, look at how you captured me. Do you think that's who I am, or is that who you needed me to be? Jungkook turned to the canvas. For the first time, really looked at it, not as the artist but as someone standing outside of it. The softness in the expression, the quiet longing, the almost ethereal stillness. It was beautiful. But it was also incomplete. Not because it wasn't finished, but because it was missing something real. Jungkook swallowed hard. I never meant to erase you, he said, his voice quieter now. Jimin's expression softened just slightly. I know, he replied, that's what makes it worse. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Around them, the crowd seemed unsure whether to stay, to leave, to keep watching, but no one moved, no one dared break the moment. Jungkook took a step closer. Then why come back, he asked. If everything I did pushed you away, why are you here now? Jimin met his gaze. And for a moment, the walls he had built seemed to crack. Because you said my name, Jimin said simply. Jungkook frowned, confused. That's it. No, Jimin admitted, but it's where it started. He hesitated again, then added more quietly, I thought I was done with this, with you, with everything that came with it, but hearing you standing here painting me again. His voice faltered. I realized I was lying to myself. Jungkook's heart pounded. About what? Jimin didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped even closer, close enough that the distance between them felt almost non-existent. Close enough that Jungkook could see the faint tremor in his hands, the way his breathing had become uneven. About how much of me I left behind with you. The words were barely a whisper. But they hit harder than anything else. Jungkook's breath caught. For a second, everything else faded, the gallery, the people, the noise. It was just them. Just this moment. Unresolved. Unfinished. And far more dangerous than either of them was ready to admit. The first glass shattered before anyone realized what had been thrown. It wasn't loud at first, just a sharp crack like something small breaking under pressure, but then the rest followed. A cascade of sound, gasps, someone screaming. The pristine calm of the gallery fractured in seconds. Jungkook turned instinctively, his body moving before his thoughts could catch up, stepping in front of Jimin as a second object struck the wall behind them with a violent thud. What the hell? Traitor! The voice came from somewhere in the crowd, distorted by anger, swallowed quickly by the chaos that erupted. Security rushed forward, people stumbled back, phones lifted higher, not to capture art anymore but spectacle. Jungkook's pulse slammed in his ears. Stay behind me, he muttered, not even looking at Jimin. Jimin let out a disbelieving breath. Are you serious right now? Another shout cut through the noise. You think this is art, using him like that, disgusting. Jungkook's jaw clenched. He scanned the crowd, trying to identify the source, but faces blurred together, some shocked, some thrilled, some furious. It wasn't just anger. It was something uglier. Jungkook, Jimin said, sharper this time, move. No. The response came too quickly, too firmly. Jimin stared at the back of his head. You don't get to protect me now. Jungkook turned then, eyes flashing, and you don't get to decide when I stop. For a split second, the chaos around them seemed to dull again, like the world pulling back just enough to let their words hit harder. You think this is about protection? Jimin shot back, stepping around him despite Jungkook's attempt to block him. This, he gestured sharply toward the crowd, the painting, the broken glass glittering on the floor, this is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Jungkook followed him, anger rising to meet the accusation. Avoid by running away. By refusing to be turned into your confession piece. The words rang out, louder than Jimin probably intended. Several heads turned instantly. Jungkook froze, my what? You heard me, Jimin said, breath uneven now but voice unwavering. This painting, this whole exhibition, it's not just art, it's you trying to say something you never had the courage to say directly. Jungkook's expression hardened. You're assuming a lot. I'm recognizing a pattern. Another crash interrupted them, this time closer. Security had begun pushing people back, but tension still crackled dangerously. The curator was shouting orders, his voice strained and panicked. Jungkook barely noticed. All he could see was Jimin. All those nights, Jimin continued, quieter now but no less intense, when you'd stare at me like you were trying to memorize something before it disappeared. You never said what you were thinking, you just painted. Jungkook's throat tightened. That was how I communicated. No, Jimin said, that was how you hid. The accusation hit deeper than anything else that night. Jungkook took a step forward, closing the distance again, his voice dropping dangerously low. You don't get to rewrite what that was. And you don't get to pretend it was enough. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jungkook laughed. It wasn't warm, it wasn't amused. It was sharp, almost bitter. Enough, he repeated. You think I wasn't giving everything I had. Jimin's gaze didn't waver. You gave what was safe. That's not fair. No, Jimin said, his voice cracking slightly now, emotion bleeding through despite his control. What's not fair is being loved like an idea instead of a person. The word hung there. Loved. Jungkook went completely still. Around them, the chaos was finally being contained, security forcing people out, voices fading into the distance, but the damage had already been done. Not to the gallery. To them. Jungkook swallowed hard, his voice quieter now. You think that's what this was? Jimin hesitated. Just for a second. But it was enough. I don't know what it was, Jimin admitted. That's the problem. Jungkook shook his head slowly, as if trying to process something too heavy to fully grasp. You left without giving me a chance to explain, he said. And you never tried to stop me. The words landed like a punch. Jungkook blinked, caught off guard. What? Jimin stepped closer again, his voice dropping to something almost fragile. I waited, he said. Do you know that? I waited for you to say something, anything that would make me stay. Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. I thought you already decided, he said. You had your bags. Because I wanted you to fight for me. The sudden burst of emotion made Jungkook flinch. Jimin's hands trembled now, his composure cracking in a way it hadn't before. I wanted you to stop me, he continued, voice breaking. To say that I mattered more than your fear, more than whatever you were trying so hard not to admit. Jungkook's mind reeled. I didn't know, he said, the words sounding weak even to himself. Jimin let out a hollow laugh. Of course you didn't, you never looked at what was right in front of you. Silence stretched between them again, thick and suffocating. Jungkook glanced at the painting. At the version of Jimin he had created. Perfect. Still. Untouchable. And suddenly he hated it. You're right, Jungkook said quietly. Jimin blinked, surprised. I didn't see everything, Jungkook continued. I saw what I could handle, what I wasn't afraid of losing. Jimin's expression softened just slightly. And what were you afraid of? Jungkook met his gaze. You. The honesty in it was raw, unfiltered. Jimin's breath hitched. Because if I admitted what you really were to me, Jungkook continued, his voice shaking now despite his effort to stay composed, then losing you wouldn't just be disappointing, it would ruin me. The confession settled heavily in the space between them. Jimin looked away first. You don't get to say that now, he murmured. I know. Then why say it at all? Jungkook hesitated. Because the truth had been buried for so long that even now, digging it out felt like tearing something open. Because you're here, he said finally, and I don't want to make the same mistake twice. Jimin's eyes flickered back to him. And what mistake was that? Jungkook took a slow step forward. Letting you walk away without knowing. Jimin searched his face as if trying to find something, anything, that would tell him whether this was real or just another version of the truth shaped into something easier to accept. And now, Jimin asked. Jungkook exhaled, his voice quieter but steadier than before. Now I'm terrified, he admitted, but I'm not hiding anymore. Jimin's lips parted slightly as if to respond, but before he could, a sharp voice cut through the air. Enough. Both of them turned. The curator stood a few feet away, flanked by security, his expression tight with barely contained frustration. This exhibition is being shut down, he said coldly, effective immediately. A murmur spread again, quieter this time but no less charged. Jungkook frowned. You can't. I can, the curator interrupted. And I will. This was supposed to be a professional event, not a spectacle. His gaze flicked briefly to Jimin. Whatever personal issues you have, he added pointedly, handle them somewhere else. Jungkook's hands curled into fists. But before he could respond, Jimin spoke. He's right. Jungkook turned to him startled. What? Jimin looked at the painting one last time. Then back at Jungkook. This was never the right place, he said softly. Jungkook's chest tightened. So what, you're leaving again? Jimin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that his voice didn't need to be loud to be heard. No, he said, not this time. Jungkook's breath caught. But if we're going to finish this, Jimin continued, his gaze steady, it won't be on a canvas. The words settled between them, heavy, undeniable. And for the first time since Jimin walked in, Jungkook understood. This wasn't about the painting anymore. It never had been. It was about everything they never said. And everything they were finally ready to face. The rain started the moment they stepped outside, as if the night itself had been waiting for them to leave. It poured relentlessly, soaking through fabric, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold and red. The crowd from the gallery had begun to scatter, some still lingering under umbrellas, whispering, watching, but Jungkook barely noticed them. All he could feel was the weight of Jimin walking beside him. Not behind. Not disappearing. Beside him. They didn't speak at first. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was crowded with everything that had been said and everything that still hadn't. Jungkook stopped abruptly under a flickering streetlight. Jimin halted a step ahead, then turned slowly, rain clinging to his lashes, his hair damp against his forehead. For a second, it felt like looking at a memory again, but this time it didn't vanish. Where are we going? Jungkook asked, his voice low but strained. Jimin studied him, as if weighing whether the question even deserved an answer. Do you always need to know where things are going before you let them happen? Jimin replied. Jungkook exhaled sharply. This is things, this is you. And that changes what? It changes everything. Jimin looked away, a faint, conflicted smile pulling at his lips before it disappeared again. You're still doing it, he said quietly. Doing what? Turning this into something heavier than it needs to be. Jungkook frowned, frustration rising again. You think this isn't heavy? I think, Jimin said, stepping closer, rain dripping from his sleeves, that you only know how to deal with things when they feel overwhelming. Like if it's not intense, it's not real. Jungkook's jaw tightened. That's not true. Isn't it? Jimin challenged. Back there in the gallery, you didn't say my name softly, you didn't say it privately, you said it like a declaration, like you wanted the world to hear it. Because I did. The answer came without hesitation. Jimin blinked, caught off guard. Jungkook took a step forward, closing the distance between them again, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. I was tired of pretending it didn't matter, he said, tired of acting like you weren't the reason I kept picking up a brush. Jimin's expression shifted, something uncertain flickering beneath his usual composure. You think saying it out loud fixes anything? Jimin asked. No, Jungkook admitted, but it stops me from lying. The rain intensified, drumming against the pavement, against their shoulders, against the silence that followed. Jimin's gaze dropped briefly, then lifted again, sharper now. You're still not saying it, he said. Jungkook frowned, saying what? Jimin stepped even closer, close enough that Jungkook could feel the heat of his breath despite the cold rain. The part you keep avoiding, Jimin murmured, the part that actually matters. Jungkook's heartbeat stuttered. You want everything to be honest now, Jimin continued, his voice quieter but more dangerous, then stopped circling around it. Jungkook swallowed hard. You left, he said instead, deflecting. Jimin's eyes narrowed. Don't. You walked away, Jungkook pushed, his voice rising slightly. And now you're here telling me I'm the one avoiding things. I said don't, Jimin repeated, sharper now. Then what do you want from me? Jungkook demanded. The question hung there, raw and unfiltered. Jimin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at Jungkook like he was trying to see past everything, past the anger, the fear, the years of silence. What I wanted, Jimin said slowly, was for you to choose me. Jungkook froze. I'm standing here now, Jimin continued, his voice trembling just slightly despite his effort to stay steady. Not as your muse, not as something you can hide behind in a painting, just me. The vulnerability in his voice cut deeper than any accusation. And I'm asking you, Jimin said, if that's enough. Jungkook's mind raced, but his body felt rooted to the spot. Enough, he echoed. For you to stop being afraid, Jimin clarified. For you to stop turning me into something distant just because it's easier than dealing with what's real. Jungkook looked at him, really looked this time. Not at the image in his mind. Not at the version he had painted. But at Jimin as he was now. Flawed. Tired. Still standing. And waiting. I don't know how to do this without being afraid, Jungkook admitted quietly. Jimin's expression softened just a fraction. I'm not asking you to stop being afraid, he said. I'm asking you to stop letting it decide everything. The words settled deep, stirring something uncomfortable but necessary. Jungkook ran a hand through his wet hair, letting out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest for years. You make it sound simple, he said. It's not, Jimin replied, it's just honest. Jungkook let out a short, quiet laugh. You always did that. Did what? Made things sound easier than they actually are. Jimin shrugged slightly. Maybe you just make things harder than they need to be. Jungkook stepped closer again, the space between them disappearing completely now. Or maybe, he said, his voice dropping, you underestimate how much this matters to me. Jimin didn't back away. Then prove it. The challenge was immediate. Unfiltered. Jungkook's breath hitched. Don't paint me, Jimin added softly. Don't turn me into something you can control, just be here with me. The simplicity of it felt almost impossible. Jungkook had spent years translating feelings into something tangible, something he could manage. Being present, being exposed without that barrier, it felt like stepping off a ledge without knowing if there was ground below. You're asking me to give up the only way I know how to hold on to you, Jungkook said. Jimin shook his head. I'm asking you to trust that you don't have to hold on so tightly. Another silence fell, but this one felt different. Less suffocating. More uncertain. Say it, Jimin said suddenly. Jungkook blinked. What? The thing you've been avoiding since the beginning. Jungkook's chest tightened. You know what I'm talking about. Jimin pressed. Jungkook looked away briefly, then back at him, his gaze conflicted. If I say it, he said slowly, there's no taking it back. Jimin's lips parted slightly. Good. The word was barely a whisper, but it carried weight. Jungkook's pulse raced. Every instinct told him to retreat, to deflect, to find another way around it. But Jimin was still there. Still waiting. Still choosing to stay. And for the first time, Jungkook realized that maybe the real risk wasn't saying it. Maybe it was never saying it at all. A sudden screech of tires cut through the moment. Both of them turned instinctively. A black car had stopped abruptly at the curb, its engine still running, headlights glaring through the rain. The tinted window rolled down slowly, revealing a figure inside, someone neither of them expected to see. Jimin's expression shifted instantly, all softness gone, replaced by something tense, guarded. No way, he muttered under his breath. Jungkook frowned. Who is that? The car door opened. And the moment the figure stepped out, the air seemed to change again, heavier, sharper, like a storm within the storm. You really didn't think this would stay quiet, did you? The stranger said, voice smooth but laced with something dangerous. Jungkook's instincts flared immediately. Jimin didn't move. Didn't step forward. Didn't step back. But Jungkook saw it, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled slightly at his sides. You shouldn't have come here, Jimin said, his voice colder than Jungkook had ever heard it. The stranger smiled faintly. And miss this, he replied, glancing briefly at Jungkook before returning his gaze to Jimin. I've been waiting for you to slip. Jungkook's stomach dropped. What is he talking about? He asked, looking between them. Jimin didn't answer. And that silence was louder than anything else that night. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about them anymore. There was something else. Something Jimin hadn't said. Something that had been following them long before the gallery, long before tonight. And for the first time since Jimin walked back into his life, Jungkook realized. He didn't just lose Jimin once. He might have never known him at all. The rain seemed to quiet just enough for the tension to speak louder. Jungkook stepped forward before he even realized he was moving, placing himself slightly in front of Jimin again, instinct overriding reason. "Who are you?" Jungkook asked, his voice low but steady even as his pulse hammered in his chest. The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took his time closing the car door, the soft click echoing unnaturally in the wet night air. His gaze lingered on Jungkook, sharp and assessing like he was measuring something invisible. Then he smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. Just enough to unsettle. "I was wondering what kind of person could make him come back," the man said, tilting his head slightly toward Jimin. "Now I see it's exactly what I expected." Jungkook frowned. "You didn't answer my question." "No," the man replied calmly, "I didn't." Jimin stepped forward this time, his voice cutting in before Jungkook could push further. "Leave." The word was firm, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something tight, something almost strained. The stranger's eyes flicked to Jimin, amused. "You always do this," he said. "Pretend you can control the situation by keeping things quiet." "I said leave." "And I said no." The air shifted again, sharper now. Jungkook glanced at Jimin, noticing the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders had gone rigid. "You know him," Jungkook said quietly. It wasn't a question. Jimin didn't look at him. "Yes." That single word hit harder than expected. How Jungkook pressed. Jimin hesitated. And that hesitation was enough. "Interesting," the stranger murmured, watching them both now. "You didn't tell him." "Stop," Jimin snapped, his composure cracking just slightly. Jungkook's chest tightened. "Tell me what?" The stranger chuckled softly, stepping closer, unfazed by the rain soaking through his coat. "You really don't know," he said, looking directly at Jungkook, "about the reason he left." Jungkook's breath caught. He turned sharply to Jimin. "You said it was about me, about the paintings, about—" "It was," Jimin cut in quickly. "But not all of it," the stranger added smoothly. Jimin's eyes flashed. "I told you to stop talking." "And I told you," the man replied, his tone dropping slightly, "that hiding things never works for long." Jungkook felt something cold settle in his chest. "What is he talking about?" he asked again, this time louder, more urgent. Jimin finally looked at him. And for the first time since reappearing, there was something unmistakable in his expression. Fear. Not the quiet, internal kind Jungkook had seen before. This was different. This was real. "It doesn't matter," Jimin said. "It does to me," Jungkook shot back immediately. The stranger watched the exchange with open interest, like this was exactly the reaction he had been waiting for. "You should tell him," he said to Jimin almost casually. "He deserves to know what he got himself into." "I didn't get into anything," Jungkook snapped. The man's gaze snapped back to him, sharper now. "Didn't you?" he asked. "You just stood in a room full of people and declared him as your inspiration. You dragged his name back into the spotlight." Jungkook frowned. "What does that have to do with—" "Everything." The word cut him off cleanly. Jimin stepped closer to Jungkook, his voice low and urgent now. "Don't listen to him." "Why not?" Jungkook demanded. "Because you won't tell me the truth either." Jimin flinched slightly. And that was enough. Jungkook took a step back, running a hand through his wet hair, frustration boiling over. "This is insane," he muttered. "You show up after disappearing for years, we barely even—" He gestured helplessly between them, "and now there's some mystery I'm not allowed to understand." "It's not a mystery," the stranger said lightly. "It's a consequence." Jungkook turned to him sharply. "Of what?" The man's smile faded slightly, something colder taking its place. "Of choices," he said, "of connections that weren't supposed to happen." Jungkook's chest tightened again. He looked at Jimin, searching his face for denial, for anything that would make this make sense. But Jimin stayed silent. And that silence felt like confirmation. Start talking, Jungkook said, his voice dangerously quiet now. Jimin shook his head, not here. Then where? Somewhere safe. The stranger laughed softly. Safe, you still think there's such a place? Jimin's gaze snapped to him, sharp and warning. Enough. But Jungkook wasn't letting this go. Safe from what? He demanded. Jimin hesitated again, then finally said, from people like him. The answer was vague. Too vague. Jungkook's patience snapped. I'm not moving anywhere until you tell me what's going on, he said firmly. Jimin stepped closer again, lowering his voice. Jungkook, please. The plea caught him off guard. Jimin rarely asked. Rarely sounded like that. Trust me, Jimin added, softer now. Jungkook let out a bitter breath. That's a little hard right now. I know, Jimin admitted, but if you stay here, if you keep pushing. What? Jungkook interrupted. Something worse happens. Yes. The answer was immediate. Certainly. Jungkook stared at him, searching for doubt. There was none. Behind them, the stranger shifted slightly, as if growing impatient. You're wasting time, he said, and you know what happens when you do that. Jimin's jaw tightened. Jungkook caught it, the reaction, the subtle flicker of something deeper. You're not just some random person, Jungkook said slowly, turning back to the stranger. You have something over him. The man didn't deny it. That's one way to put it. Jungkook's stomach dropped. What kind of something? He asked. The stranger took another step closer, his voice lowering just enough to make it feel like a secret. The kind that doesn't disappear just because you walk away. Jimin grabbed Jungkook's arm suddenly. Stop, he said, urgency clear now. This is exactly what he wants. Jungkook looked at him, and what do you want? Jimin didn't hesitate this time. For you to stay out of this. Jungkook's expression hardened. That's not happening. Jimin's grip tightened slightly. You don't understand. Then make me understand. The rain continued to fall, steady and relentless, like a countdown neither of them could stop. Jimin closed his eyes briefly, as if weighing something heavy. When he opened them again, there was a shift. A decision. I didn't just leave because of you, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook's chest tightened. I left because someone was watching, Jimin continued. Watching everything, the exhibitions, the people I was around, you. Jungkook's breath caught. Me. Yes. Why? Jimin hesitated, then said, because of what I was involved in. The words felt like they changed the entire night. Jungkook stared at him. Involved in what? Jimin didn't answer right away. The stranger did. He still doesn't trust you enough, the man said, almost amused. That's disappointing. Jimin's eyes flashed with anger. You don't get to comment on that. But I do, the man replied calmly, because I'm the reason he's still alive. Silence. Heavy. Unbelievable. Jungkook's mind struggled to catch up. What does that mean? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jimin's grip on his arm loosened slightly. It means, Jimin said slowly, that leaving wasn't a choice. Jungkook's heart pounded. It was a condition. The rain felt colder now. Sharper. And if I did, Jimin continued, his voice quieter but steady, you would have been dragged into something you couldn't get out of. Jungkook shook his head slightly, disbelief clashing with something darker. You're saying you left to protect me. Jimin didn't answer. He didn't need to. Jungkook let out a hollow laugh. That's insane. It's the truth. Jungkook looked away, his thoughts racing, trying to piece everything together, the sudden disappearance, the silence, the unfinished paintings. And now, he asked, why come back if it was that dangerous? Jimin's gaze softened just for a second. Because you said my name, he said again. But this time there was more behind it. More weight. And because, Jimin added quietly, I was tired of letting fear decide everything. The stranger sighed, almost bored now. How touching, he muttered, but unfortunately none of that changes the situation. Jungkook turned to him sharply. What situation? The man's eyes darkened slightly. The one where he still belongs to something he can't walk away from. Jimin's entire body went still. Jungkook felt it immediately. What does that mean? He demanded. Jimin didn't answer. Didn't move. Didn't even breathe. And in that moment, Jungkook realized something that made his stomach twist. This wasn't over. Not even close. Whatever Jimin had been running from had just caught up to them. Jimin's silence stretched just a second too long. And that was all it took for something inside Jungkook to snap. Belongs, Jungkook repeated, his voice sharp, disbelieving. What does that even mean, belongs to what? The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched Jimin waiting, almost expectant, like he was giving him one last chance to speak first. Jimin didn't. His gaze stayed fixed on the wet pavement, shoulders tense, breath shallow. That was answer enough. Jungkook let out a humorless laugh, stepping back as if the distance might help him think clearly, but it only made everything feel worse. You keep saying things like that, Jungkook said, running a hand through his soaked hair, like I'm supposed to just accept it without explanation. Like I'm just, what? A bystander in something that apparently involved me enough to ruin everything. Jimin finally looked up, his expression tight. It wasn't supposed to involve you, he said. But it did, Jungkook snapped, and you don't get to decide how much I'm allowed to know about it. The stranger took a slow step forward, his shoes splashing through shallow water, his voice smooth but cutting. He's right, you know, he said, glancing between them. You never were very good at letting people choose for themselves. Jimin's eyes flashed. Don't twist this. I don't need to twist anything, the man replied calmly. You did that all on your own. Jungkook's chest tightened, anger rising again. Stop talking around it, he said, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous now. Tell me what he's involved in. The stranger smiled faintly. Careful what you ask for. I'm not asking you, Jungkook shot back, I'm asking him. Jimin exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for too long. You're not going to like it, he said. Jungkook scoffed, try me. Jimin hesitated, eyes flickering briefly toward the stranger before returning to Jungkook. That exhibition tonight, Jimin said, the attention it got, the way people reacted. Jungkook frowned, what about it? It wasn't just about art. Jungkook's patience thinned, no, clearly it was, so say what it was. Jimin's jaw tightened. There are people, he began slowly, choosing each word carefully, who don't just see art as expression, they see it as leverage. Jungkook stared at him, leverage for what? Influence, control, power over narratives, over reputations, over people. The rain seemed louder again, like it was trying to drown out the conversation. Jungkook shook his head, you're talking in circles. I'm trying to keep you out of it. Well, you're doing a terrible job. The stranger chuckled softly, he always did underestimate you. Jimin ignored him, stepping closer to Jungkook, his voice dropping. I got involved with people who collect more than just paintings, Jimin said. They collect secrets, scandals, weaknesses. Jungkook's stomach twisted. And you're one of those collections, he asked. Jimin didn't answer directly. I worked with them, he said instead. The words hit like a shock. Jungkook blinked, worked how? The stranger stepped in before Jimin could respond. He was good at it, he said casually, better than most. Jimin's voice cut through sharp, don't. But Jungkook was already looking at him differently now. What does that mean? Jungkook demanded. What did you do? Jimin's gaze wavered. For the first time he looked ashamed. I was the one who got close to people, Jimin admitted quietly. Artists, collectors, anyone whose reputation could be useful. Jungkook's breath caught. You're saying you used people. Jimin didn't deny it. Yes. The word landed heavy. Jungkook stared at him, disbelief mixing with something sharper. And me, Jungkook asked, his voice quieter now but far more dangerous. Was I part of that too? Jimin's eyes snapped up immediately. No. The answer was instant. Too instant. Jungkook laughed again, but this time it sounded hollow. That's convenient. It's the truth, Jimin insisted. Then why were they watching me? Jungkook shot back. Why did you have to leave to protect me? Jimin's silence returned. And that silence hurt more than anything else. Because you weren't supposed to matter, Jimin said finally. The words felt like they sucked the air out of the space between them. Jungkook's expression froze. What? Jimin stepped closer, his voice unsteady now. You weren't part of the plan, he said. You were just supposed to be another connection, another name, another opportunity. Jungkook's chest tightened painfully. But you weren't, Jimin added quickly. That's the problem, you became something else. Something else, Jungkook repeated, his voice flat. Jimin nodded, eyes searching his face desperately. You made it impossible for me to do what I was supposed to do, he said. You made it impossible to treat this like a job. Jungkook shook his head slowly, trying to process. So what does that make me, he asked, a mistake? Jimin flinched. No, he said, never that. Then what? Jimin hesitated, then said softly, the reason everything went wrong. The words cut deep. Jungkook took a step back, the distance between them widening again. Wow, he murmured, shaking his head, that's unbelievable. It's not what you think, Jimin said quickly. No, Jungkook snapped, because from where I'm standing it sounds like I was just another target you got too attached to. I didn't target you, Jimin insisted. I met you before any of that, before I was fully involved. The stranger watched quietly, his expression unreadable now, but there was a faint tension in his posture, like even he hadn't expected this much to come out. Jungkook's voice dropped. Did you ever plan to use me? The question hung there, heavy and unavoidable. Jimin didn't answer immediately. And that hesitation was louder than anything he could have said. Jungkook's heart sank. You did, he said almost to himself. I thought about it, Jimin admitted, the words barely audible, at the beginning. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly, as if that might dull the impact. It didn't. But I didn't, Jimin continued, stepping closer again. I couldn't, you were. Don't, Jungkook cut him off sharply, don't say it like that fixes anything. Jimin stopped, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. I'm not trying to fix it, he said, I'm trying to be honest. Now. Jungkook laughed bitterly, now you want to be honest. The stranger finally spoke again, his voice cutting through the rising tension. This is exactly why I told you not to come back, he said to Jimin, messy, emotional, predictable. Jimin's gaze snapped to him, anger flaring. Stay out of this. I can't, the man replied calmly, you know that. Jungkook looked between them, something cold settling in his chest. He's not just someone you used to work with, Jungkook said slowly, he's still part of it. Jimin didn't respond. Didn't deny it. Jungkook let out a slow breath, the realization sinking in. So you didn't just bring your past back into my life, he said, you brought the people behind it too. I didn't bring him, Jimin said quickly, he found me. Same difference. No, it's not, Jimin insisted, it means I don't have control over this anymore. The stranger smiled faintly. You never did. Jungkook's patience finally broke. Enough, he said sharply, both of you, I'm done standing here while you talk like I'm not even part of this conversation. He stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Jimin's. You wanted honesty, Jungkook said, fine, here's mine. Jimin stilled. I don't care what you were involved in, Jungkook continued, his voice steady but intense. I don't care about these people or whatever they think they control. Jimin's eyes flickered. What I care about, Jungkook said, is whether any of what we had was real. The question cut deeper than all the others. Jimin's breath caught. It was, he said immediately. Even at the beginning. Jimin hesitated. Jungkook's chest tightened again. Yes, Jimin said finally, his voice softer now but firm. Even then, I didn't understand it yet, but it was real. Jungkook searched his face, looking for doubt, for cracks. He didn't find any. And now, Jungkook asked. Jimin stepped closer again, closing the distance one last time. Now it's the only real thing I have left. The confession hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Jungkook's breath slowed, his mind racing, emotions colliding. Behind them the stranger sighed quietly, almost bored. You're both making this harder than it needs to be, he said. Jungkook didn't even look at him. Then make it simple, Jungkook said coldly, what do you want? The man's gaze sharpened slightly. Simple, he repeated, all right. He stepped forward, his voice dropping just enough to make every word feel deliberate. I want him to come back. Jimin's body went rigid. Jungkook's stomach dropped. And if he does, Jungkook asked. The stranger's expression didn't change. Then you become part of the problem. The threat was quiet, but it was unmistakable. And suddenly, the rain didn't feel like the storm anymore. They were standing in something far more dangerous. For a moment, the world narrowed down to three people standing in the rain, and one decision that would change everything. Jungkook let out a slow breath, his gaze locked on the stranger. "You keep talking like you have a choice to give," Jungkook said, his voice steady now in a way that felt different, less reactive, more dangerous. "Like this is some kind of negotiation." The stranger tilted his head slightly, almost intrigued. "It is." "No," Jungkook replied, "it's a threat." A faint smile tugged at the man's lips. "Same thing depending on how you look at it." Jimin stepped forward, putting himself between them this time. "Stop," he said, his voice tight, "you've said enough." But Jungkook didn't move back. Didn't step away. "Have you always listened to him this easily?" Jungkook asked quietly, his eyes still on the stranger. "Or is this new?" Jimin's head snapped toward him. "This isn't the time." "No, this is exactly the time," Jungkook cut in, "because I'm starting to see a pattern here." The stranger watched with growing interest, clearly enjoying the shift. Jungkook continued, his voice calm but cutting. "You say you left to protect me, you say you didn't have a choice, but right now, you're still letting him speak for you." Jimin's jaw tightened. "That's not what's happening." "Then prove it." The words landed like a challenge. Jimin hesitated. Again. And Jungkook saw it, the same hesitation from before, the same invisible weight holding him back. Something inside Jungkook hardened. "You're still in it," Jungkook said, more to himself than anyone else. "You never really left." "I tried," Jimin said quickly. "Tried isn't the same as doing. I didn't have the option to just walk away." "Then why come back?" Jungkook demanded. "Why show up tonight and drag all of this back into my life if you knew it wasn't over?" Jimin's voice rose for the first time. "Because I thought I could handle it." The admission echoed between them. "I thought I could see you, say what I needed to say and leave again without," he faltered slightly, then forced himself to finish, "without it turning into this." Jungkook let out a sharp breath. "So I was just supposed to be some kind of closure for you." "No," Jimin said immediately, "you were never just that." "Then what am I, Jimin?" Jungkook's voice cracked slightly despite himself. "Because right now I feel like I'm standing in the middle of something I was never supposed to understand." The stranger shifted slightly, his tone cutting in again. "You weren't," he said. Jungkook ignored him. "Answer me," Jungkook pressed. Jimin stepped closer, his expression torn, conflicted. "You're the only thing that was real," Jimin said quietly, "and that's exactly why this is dangerous." Jungkook shook his head, frustration flaring again. "Stop saying that like it explains anything." "It does," Jimin insisted. "You don't get it because you're still looking at this like it's just about us." "Because it is about us," Jungkook shot back. "It stopped being just about us a long time ago." The words hit hard. Jungkook froze. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in Jimin. In Jungkook. The anger didn't disappear. But it changed. Focused. Sharpened. "Then I need to start looking at it differently," Jungkook said quietly. Jimin frowned. "What are you?" Jungkook finally turned his full attention to the stranger. "You said he belongs to something," Jungkook said. "You said he can't walk away, so let's stop pretending this is vague." The stranger raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "What happens if he doesn't come back?" Jungkook asked. The man didn't hesitate this time. "You already know the answer." Jungkook's eyes hardened. "Say it." A brief pause. Then calmly. "Then you become leverage." The word hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Jimin's hand shot out, grabbing Jungkook's wrist. "No," he said sharply, "we're done here." But Jungkook didn't move. Didn't look away. "Leverage," Jungkook repeated slowly, "so that's all I am to you now." "Not to me," Jimin said quickly, "to them." "That doesn't make it better." "I know," Jimin admitted. The stranger watched them, something colder settling into his expression now. "You're catching on faster than I expected," he said. "That's good, it means we don't have to waste time." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "Then don't explain exactly what you want." The man stepped closer, his presence suddenly heavier, more oppressive. It's simple, he said. He comes back, he finishes what he started, and you, his gaze flicked over Jungkook, calculating, stay out of it. Jungkook let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Yeah, he said, that's not happening. Jimin tightened his grip slightly. Jungkook. No, Jungkook said, pulling his arm free. I'm done being told to stay out of something that clearly involves me. It doesn't have to, Jimin insisted. That's the point, I can fix this if you just. If I just what? Jungkook interrupted. Step aside while you go back to whatever this is, pretend none of it exists. Jimin's silence said everything. Jungkook shook his head. I'm not losing you again like that, he said, his voice quieter now but unwavering. Jimin's expression cracked slightly. You might not have a choice, he whispered. Jungkook stepped closer. Then I'll make one. The certainty in his voice made Jimin falter. For a second, just a second, something like hope flickered in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by something else. Fear. You don't understand what you're stepping into, Jimin said. Then stop protecting me from it, Jungkook replied. Start trusting me enough to face it with you. The words hit deeper than anything else that night. Jimin stared at him, conflicted, torn between instinct and something else, something he hadn't allowed himself to rely on in a long time. The stranger sighed, clearly losing patience now. This is getting tedious, he muttered. I didn't come here to watch a reunion. Jungkook turned to him again. His expression cold. Then leave. The man's eyes darkened slightly, careful. No, Jungkook said, his voice firm. You're the one who should be careful because the more you talk, the more I realize something. The stranger tilted his head, and what's that? Jungkook took a step forward, closing the distance between them just enough to shift the balance. You need him, Jungkook said, more than you're letting on. A flicker. Small. But there. Jimin noticed it too. The stranger's smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Subtly. You're making assumptions, he said. And you're avoiding the question, Jungkook shot back. If he was really that replaceable, you wouldn't be here trying this hard to get him back. Silence. Heavy. Tense. Then. A quiet laugh. Low. Amused. Interesting, the man said. You might actually be more useful than I thought. Jimin stepped forward immediately. Don't. But Jungkook didn't back down. Then let's stop playing this game, Jungkook said. What does he know, what does he have that you can't afford to lose? The question hit hard. The stranger's expression shifted again, this time not amused. Cold. Measured. Dangerous. You're asking questions that will get you hurt, he said. Then answer them before that happens. Jimin grabbed Jungkook's arm again, more urgently this time. Stop, he said, you're pushing too far. Jungkook looked at him. Not far enough, he said quietly. The rain continued to fall, but none of them seemed to notice anymore. Because something had changed. The balance. The control. Jungkook wasn't just reacting anymore. He was stepping into it. And that made everything more dangerous. The stranger studied him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. You want the truth, he said. Jungkook didn't hesitate. Yes. A pause. Then. He knows things that could destroy people far more powerful than you can imagine. Jungkook's chest tightened. What kind of things? The man's gaze flicked briefly to Jimin before returning to Jungkook. The kind that don't just ruin careers, he said, they end lives. Silence crashed down again. Jungkook looked at Jimin, his mind racing. You've been carrying that this whole time, he asked quietly. Jimin didn't respond. Didn't deny it. And suddenly, everything made sense in the worst possible way. The distance. The fear. The way he left. You should have told me, Jungkook said. Jimin's voice was barely a whisper. I couldn't. Jungkook shook his head slowly. You didn't trust me. I was trying to protect you. That's not the same thing. The words landed harder than any accusation. Jimin's expression faltered. And for the first time, Jungkook saw it clearly. Not just fear. Not just guilt. Regret. Deep. Unavoidable. I don't need protection, Jungkook said, I need the truth. Jimin looked at him, something breaking behind his eyes. You might regret that. Jungkook held his gaze. Try me. The rain fell harder. The night pressed in closer. And somewhere in the silence between them, the truth was finally starting to surface. Whether they were ready for it or not. Jimin inhaled sharply, like the air itself had turned too heavy to breathe. Fine, he said. The word came out quiet, but it carried something final, something irreversible. Jungkook felt it immediately. The stranger did too. That's a dangerous choice, the man murmured, but there was something different now, not warning, anticipation. Jimin ignored him. If I tell you everything, Jimin said, his eyes locked on Jungkook, there's no going back, not for you, not for me. Jungkook didn't hesitate. There wasn't any going back the moment you walked into that gallery. A flicker of something passed through Jimin's expression, pain, maybe even relief. Then he nodded. Okay. The rain softened slightly, as if the storm itself was listening. Jimin stepped closer, his voice low, forcing Jungkook to lean in just enough to hear him over the fatting noise of the city. It started with a private exhibition, Jimin said. Not like tonight, no press, no audience, just a room full of people who didn't come for art, they came for access. Jungkook's brows furrowed. Access to what? Information, Jimin replied. Influence, people who could be bought, sold, or broken depending on what you knew about them. The stranger crossed his arms, watching silently now. Jimin continued, his tone steady but heavy. I was introduced to them through someone I trusted, he said. At first it didn't feel wrong, it felt exclusive, like I was being invited into something important. Jungkook's jaw tightened, and then I realized what they were actually doing, Jimin said. They used art as a cover, exhibitions, private viewings, collectors' circles, it was all just a way to gather people in one place. Powerful people, careless people. Jungkook's stomach twisted. And you, he asked, what was your role? Jimin didn't answer right away. The hesitation returned, but this time it wasn't avoidance. It was wait. I got close to them, Jimin said finally, talked to them, gained their trust. Jungkook's chest tightened again. You mean you? Yes, Jimin cut in, I listened, I remembered, I reported back. The words hit harder this time because they were clearer. Colder. Jungkook looked away briefly, trying to process. So you were spying on them, he said. Jimin gave a small, humorless smile. That's one way to put it. And the things you learned, Jungkook pressed, his voice lower now, those are the things he's talking about. Jimin nodded once. Some of it was small, he said. Affairs, financial secrets, things that could ruin reputations. And the rest? Jimin's gaze dropped. The rest could ruin lives. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Jungkook's mind raced, connecting pieces that had never fit before. And when did I become part of this, he asked. Jimin's head lifted immediately. You weren't supposed to. That's not what I asked. Jimin exhaled slowly. They noticed you, he admitted. Not at first, but the more time I spent with you, the more obvious it became that you mattered. Jungkook's hands clenched at his sides. And that made me useful, he asked. No, Jimin said firmly, it made you a risk. The word cut deep. A risk to what? Jungkook demanded. To me, Jimin said, to them, to everything. Jungkook let out a bitter laugh. That's not exactly comforting. I know, Jimin said quietly. The stranger shifted slightly, his patience thinning. You're dragging this out, he said, we don't have all night. Jimin shot him a glare, then stopped interrupting. For the first time, the man didn't respond immediately. Jungkook noticed. And something clicked. You're not in control of this either, Jungkook said slowly, looking at the stranger. The man's gaze snapped to him. Careful, he said again, quieter now. Jungkook ignored the warning. If you were, you wouldn't be standing here negotiating, Jungkook continued. You just take him. Jimin's eyes widened slightly. The stranger didn't smile this time. Keep talking, he said. Jungkook stepped closer, his voice steady despite the tension coiling tighter around them. You need him because he has something you can't get back without him, Jungkook said. Information, names, something only he knows. Silence. Then, a slow exhale from the stranger. Not bad, he admitted. Jimin's grip on Jungkook's sleeve tightened. Stop provoking him. I'm not provoking him, Jungkook said. I'm understanding him. The man's eyes darkened. And what do you think you understand? He asked. That this isn't about control, Jungkook replied. It's about damage control. A pause. A long one. Then the stranger laughed softly. You really are a problem, he said. Jungkook didn't respond. He didn't need to. Fine, the man continued. You want clarity, I'll give it to you. Jimin tensed immediately. Don't, he warned. But the man ignored him. There was a list, he said, his voice calm, deliberate. Names, details, everything your friend here gathered over the years. Jungkook's chest tightened. In that list, he asked. The stranger's gaze flicked to Jimin. Disappeared. Silence crashed down again. Jungkook turned slowly to Jimin. You took it, he said. It wasn't a question. Jimin didn't deny it. Yes. The word felt heavier than anything else that night. Jungkook's heart pounded. Why, he asked. Jimin's voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. Because I realized what they were going to do with it. And what was that? Jungkook pressed. Jimin hesitated. The stranger answered. Use it, he said simply, the way it was always meant to be used. Jungkook's stomach dropped. You mean blackmail, he said. The man smiled faintly, among other things. Jungkook looked back at Jimin, disbelief flooding in again. You stole it, he said, you ran. I didn't run, Jimin corrected, I got out. And left them empty-handed, Jungkook added. Yes. The stranger's expression hardened slightly. Which brings us to now, he said. Jungkook felt it, the shift, the tightening of everything. You think he still has it, Jungkook said. I know he does, the man replied. Jimin shook his head, you don't. Then where is it, the stranger asked, his tone suddenly sharper. Jimin didn't answer. Jungkook looked between them, realization dawning slowly. You're not sure, Jungkook said to the stranger. The man's jaw tightened slightly. That was enough confirmation. And you can't find it without him, Jungkook continued. The silence answered again. Jungkook let out a slow breath. So this whole thing, he said, gesturing between them, is about a list. It's never just about the list, the stranger replied. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. Then what is it about? The man stepped closer, his voice dropping. Control, he said, the kind that doesn't disappear just because someone walks away. Jungkook held his gaze. Then you've already lost it, he said. Jimin's head snapped toward him. Jungkook. No, Jungkook said firmly, he doesn't have it, you don't have it, that means no one controls it. The stranger's expression went completely still. You're making a dangerous assumption, he said. Am I? Jungkook challenged. Jimin's grip tightened again, urgency flooding back. Stop, he said, you don't understand what you're doing. Jungkook looked at him. Then tell me, he said, where is it? Jimin's eyes flickered. For a moment it looked like he might answer. Then, I can't. The words were barely audible. Jungkook's chest tightened again. You still don't trust me, he said quietly. It's not about trust, Jimin said. It's always about trust. The stranger exhaled sharply, clearly done with the back and forth. Enough, he said, this ends now. Jungkook turned to him. What are you going to do, he asked, force him. The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because suddenly the air shifted. Again. But this time it wasn't subtle. Footsteps. More than one. Jimin's head snapped toward the sound instantly. His expression changed. Completely. Jungkook, he said, his voice low and urgent, we have to go. Jungkook frowned, what? Now. The stranger didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked prepared. That would be unwise, he said calmly. Jimin grabbed Jungkook's wrist. Hard. This isn't just him anymore, Jimin said, they're here. Jungkook's pulse spiked. They. Jimin didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because from the shadows beyond the streetlight, figures began to emerge. Not rushing. Not panicked. Controlled. Purposeful. And suddenly, the night didn't feel like an argument anymore. It felt like the beginning of something they couldn't walk away from. The first figure stepped fully into the light, and everything inside Jungkook went still. Not fear. Something sharper. Recognition not of the person but of what they represented. Control. Precision. Power that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. Jimin's grip tightened painfully around his wrist. Don't say anything, Jimin whispered, his voice barely audible. Don't react. Jungkook let out a quiet breath, but his eyes never left the approaching figures. How many? He murmured. Jimin didn't answer immediately. Too many. The stranger beside them straightened slightly, his posture shifting just enough to show this was no longer his scene alone. They're early, he muttered almost to himself. Jimin's gaze snapped to him. You called them. The man didn't look at him. I didn't have to. That answer landed worse than a confession. The figures stopped just a few steps away, forming a quiet, deliberate line that cut off the street behind them. Their presence wasn't chaotic like before in the gallery, it was controlled, intentional. One of them stepped forward. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Certainly. You've made this more complicated than it needed to be, the newcomer said, his voice calm, almost polite. Jimin stepped slightly in front of Jungkook again. I told you I was out, Jimin said. You don't get to decide that, the man replied. Jungkook's jaw tightened. You keep saying that, Jungkook cut in, like he doesn't have a choice. The newcomer's gaze shifted to him for the first time. Sharp. Assessing. And you are, he asked. Someone you should stop underestimating, Jungkook replied. Jimin's grip tightened again. Jungkook. No, Jungkook said, his voice firm. I'm done standing quietly while people talk like I don't exist. The man studied him for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost amused nod. That explains a lot, he said. You're the variable. Jungkook frowned. The what? The one thing he wasn't supposed to have, the man said, glancing briefly at Jimin. A complication. Jimin's expression hardened. He's not part of this. He is now. The words were quiet. Final. Jungkook felt something shift again, not outside but inside himself. The line had been crossed. There was no more before. No, Jungkook said, his voice steady, he doesn't belong to this, and neither do I. The man's expression didn't change. Belonging isn't about what you want, he said, it's about what you owe. Jungkook let out a short breath. Then maybe you should explain what exactly you think he owes you. Jimin's voice cut in sharply. Stop pushing them. Jungkook didn't look at him. I'm not pushing, I'm asking. And they don't answer questions, Jimin said more urgently now. They don't negotiate like normal people. Then I'll make them, Jungkook replied. The stranger behind them let out a low chuckle. You're either very brave or very stupid. Jungkook didn't turn. Still waiting to find out, he said. The man in front stepped closer, the rain barely touching him now as if even the storm avoided interfering. You want answers, he said. Fine. Jimin's entire body tensed. This isn't how this works, Jimin said. It is now, the man replied. Jungkook held his ground. What does he owe you? Jungkook repeated. The man's gaze flicked briefly to Jimin, then back to Jungkook. Loyalty, he said. Jungkook scoffed. That's not something you get to demand. It is when it's built on survival. The words hung heavy. Jungkook frowned. Explain. Jimin shook his head. Don't. He was given access, the man continued, ignoring Jimin. Protection, resources, a position most people would kill for. And in return, Jungkook asked. Information, the man said. Trust, discretion. Jungkook's eyes narrowed, and when he decided he didn't want to be part of it anymore. The man's expression cooled slightly. He didn't decide that, he said, he broke it. Silence. Jungkook felt it, that shift again, deeper this time. What does that mean, he asked. Jimin's voice came out strained. It means I took something that didn't belong to me. You mean the list, Jungkook said. The man nodded once. And more, he added. Jungkook's attention snapped back. More. Jimin's grip tightened again. Don't, Jimin said. But Jungkook was already looking at him. What else did you take? Jimin's silence answered. The man in front spoke again, his tone colder now. He didn't just take information, he said. He took leverage, insurance, something that was never meant to leave our control. Jungkook's heart pounded. What kind of something? Jimin finally spoke, his voice low. Evidence. The word cut through everything. Jungkook stared at him. Evidence of what? Jimin hesitated. The man answered. Of us. The simplicity of it made it worse. Jungkook's stomach dropped. You mean crimes, Jungkook said. The man didn't confirm. Didn't deny. That's not something you get to walk away from, he said instead. Jungkook let out a slow breath, his thoughts racing. So he didn't just leave, Jungkook said, he threatened you. Jimin shook his head immediately. No, that's not. That's exactly what it is, Jungkook interrupted. You took something that could destroy them, that's not walking away, that's leverage. Jimin's voice cracked slightly. I didn't take it to use it. Intent doesn't matter, the man said calmly, only outcome. Jungkook looked between them, piecing it together. That's why you've been chasing him, Jungkook said, not just because he left, but because he has something you can't afford to lose. The man didn't respond. He didn't need to. Jungkook stepped closer, his voice dropping. And you think bringing him back fixes that? It contains it, the man replied. Jungkook shook his head. No, it doesn't, it just delays it. Jimin looked at him, something flickering in his eyes again. Hope. Fear. Both. You're starting to understand, the man said quietly, which makes you even more of a problem. Jungkook didn't flinch. Then deal with me, he said. Jimin's head snapped toward him. What are you doing? Jungkook didn't look at him. I'm not letting you handle this alone, he said. You don't know what you're saying, Jimin insisted. I know exactly what I'm saying. The conviction in his voice made Jimin falter. The man in front watched them carefully now, something calculating settling behind his eyes. You're offering yourself, he asked Jungkook. Jimin's voice broke through immediately. No. But Jungkook didn't back down. I'm saying, Jungkook replied, if you think I'm part of the problem, then stop treating me like I'm irrelevant. The rain picked up again, heavier now, louder. The man considered him for a long moment. Then, that depends, he said, on how far you're willing to go. Jimin stepped forward, anger flaring. He's not going anywhere with you. You don't get to decide that anymore, the man replied. Jungkook's chest tightened. You said this is about control, Jungkook said, so here's the truth, you've already lost it. A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face. Careful, he warned. No, Jungkook said, you're here in the middle of the street chasing someone who already walked away. That doesn't look like control to me. Silence. Tense. Sharp. Then the man exhaled slowly. You're right about one thing, he said. Jungkook didn't move. This is no longer controlled. Jimin's grip tightened again, urgency flooding back. Jungkook, we need to leave, now. Jungkook hesitated. Just for a second. The man in front noticed. That hesitation, he said quietly, that's where everything breaks. Jungkook's gaze snapped back to him. And what happens when it does, Jungkook asked. The man's expression turned completely cold. People get hurt. The words landed like a promise. Jimin didn't wait anymore. He pulled Jungkook sharply. Move. This time Jungkook didn't resist. Because something in the air had changed again. Not tension. Not threat. Something worse. Finality. And as they turned, as the figures behind them shifted, not rushing but ready, Jungkook realized something with absolute clarity. This wasn't about escaping anymore. It was about surviving what came next. The rain didn't stop. It followed them as they ran, as if the night itself refused to let them disappear quietly. Their footsteps echoed against the empty streets, uneven, urgent, breaths sharp and ragged in the cold air. Jungkook didn't ask where they were going this time. He just followed. Because for the first time, it wasn't about control or understanding every step ahead. It was about trust. Jimin pulled him into a narrow alley hidden from the streetlights, the shadows swallowing them whole. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there breathing, the sound of distant footsteps fading or maybe getting closer. It was impossible to tell. Jungkook leaned back against the cold wall, his chest rising and falling heavily. This isn't going to stop, is it? He said quietly. Jimin didn't answer right away. Because they both already knew. No, Jimin admitted. Silence settled between them again, but this time it wasn't filled with confusion or anger. It was clarity. Jungkook turned his head slightly, looking at him. Then we stop running. Jimin froze. What? Jungkook pushed himself off the wall, stepping closer, his expression steady despite everything. You heard me, he said. Running hasn't worked, hiding hasn't worked, you said it yourself, they don't stop. Jimin shook his head immediately. You don't understand, this isn't something you just stand up to, these people are not untouchable, Jungkook cut in. Jimin stared at him, frustration and fear clashing in his eyes. You're underestimating them. And you're overestimating how much power they actually have, Jungkook replied. If they were as untouchable as you think, they wouldn't be chasing you like this. The words hit hard. Jimin looked away, his mind racing. They have everything to lose, Jungkook continued. That's why they're desperate. And that's exactly why they're dangerous, Jimin shot back. Jungkook stepped closer again, his voice lowering. So are we. Jimin's breath caught. The confidence in Jungkook's voice wasn't reckless. It was certain. And that scared him more than anything. You don't know what you're saying, Jimin murmured. I do, Jungkook said. You said you took something from them, something that could destroy them. Jimin's expression tightened. Yes. Then that's not just a risk, Jungkook said, that's power. Jimin let out a bitter laugh. You think I wanted that? No, Jungkook admitted, but you have it anyway. The rain dripped from the edge of the alley, the sound rhythmic, almost steadying. Jimin looked at him again, really looked this time, not as someone he needed to protect, not as someone fragile, but as someone standing in front of him, unshaken. You're not scared, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook exhaled. I am, he admitted, but I'm more scared of losing you again. The honesty in it broke something open. Jimin's composure cracked just enough. You don't even know what that means, Jimin said, his voice softer now. Staying with me, being part of this, it doesn't just put you at risk, it changes everything. Jungkook stepped closer until there was no space left between them. Then let it, he said. Jimin searched his face, looking for doubt. There was none. Only certainty. Only choice. You said I never chose you before, Jungkook continued, that I let you walk away. Jimin's breath hitched slightly. I'm not doing that again. The words settled deep. Final. Jimin closed his eyes briefly, like he was standing at the edge of something irreversible. Because he was. When he opened them again, the fear was still there. But it wasn't the only thing anymore. Okay, Jimin said. Jungkook blinked, okay. Jimin nodded slowly. Okay, he repeated, no more running. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not just tension. Not just emotion. Alignment. For the first time, they were standing on the same side of it all. Jungkook let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Then we need a plan, he said. Jimin gave a small, almost tired smile. You always jump straight to that. And you always try to handle everything alone. Jimin didn't argue this time. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulling out something small, wrapped carefully in waterproof fabric. Jungkook's gaze dropped to it instantly. Is that? Yes, Jimin said. The weight of it was obvious, even before it was unwrapped. Jungkook's chest tightened. You've had it this whole time. Jimin nodded. I couldn't trust anyone with it, he said, not until now. The words were quiet, but they carried more meaning than anything else. Jungkook met his gaze. And now? Jimin hesitated for just a second. Then he placed it in Jungkook's hands. Now I trust you. The world seemed to pause. Not the rain. Not the distant city. Just them. Because this was the thing everything had been about. Not just the danger. Not just the past. But trust. Real, unguarded, irreversible trust. Jungkook looked down at it, then back at Jimin. We end this, he said. Jimin nodded. Together. A faint sound echoed at the mouth of the alley. Footsteps. Closer this time. Not hidden anymore. Jungkook tightened his grip slightly, then looked back at Jimin. Jimin didn't look away. For once, neither of them did. Ready? Jungkook asked. Jimin took a steady breath. Then. Yes. They stepped out of the shadows. Not running. Not hiding. But facing forward, side by side, into whatever waited for them. And for the first time, the silence that followed wasn't fear. It was resolve. Because the story that began with one painting, one name, and one unfinished truth had finally become something else entirely. Not about what was hidden, not about what was lost, but about what they chose to face together. And this time, neither of them walked away.